3 weeks into the NFL season, and it's the Eagles sitting on top of the NFC East with 3-0 record. Jalen Hurts and company handing the Commanders a 24-8 loss over the weekend. It was 24-0 at half. Devontae Smith, 156 receiving yards. Hurts, 22 of 35 or 340 yards. 3 touchdowns, absolutely no interceptions. Eagles' odds to win the Super Bowl, they've jumped up a little bit there. They are now the 4th betting favorite. 9-1 odds along with the Bucs behind the Chiefs and the Bills. Jalen Hurts, by the way, the 3rd favorite to win MVP behind Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. When it comes to next year's draft, Eagles right now have the Saints' first-round pick. Saints right now would be picking at 7, thus the Eagles, Saints 1-2 on the season so far. Let's welcome back Brady, Quinn, Danny, Kanell. Looking back to what we've seen so far in Week 3, teams that impressed you the most, and you're going with the Eagles.
It's the Eagles. You just talked about, by the way, all the draft capital that they have. There was a thought before the season, Danny, that depending on how things went with Jalen Hurts, it was kind of like a make it or break a year. Maybe one of those picks would be used for a quarterback to replace him. No one is saying that right now. I mean, Jalen Hurts, in my opinion, he's the front runner for the MVP. I know the odds may not say that, but he has been phenomenal this year. He's got over 1,000 yards between rushing and passing, 7 total touchdowns, 4 through the air, 3 on the ground. They're throwing 1 pick, doing a great job of taking care of the football. You see the completion percentage. And here's the craziest stat of all.
Give it to him.
The Eagles have only scored 14 points in the second half through 3 games. They are dominating teams in the first half so far. And in large part, too, credit their defense. Held opponents to less than 10 points the last 2 weeks. But, I mean, when you think about winning by double-digit margins, which they have, when you kind of comb through it outside of that close comeback victory where the Lions kind of made that game closer than it really was, they've been dominating opponents. They're doing so in the first half and then just kind of cruising in the second half. So
it's been
credit the Eagles, man.
It's been phenomenal. I went down and watched them practice here against the Dolphins, and 2 organizations that really set the tone for how to set up a quarterback and to give him a chance to succeed, right? They go out, they make the move for A.J. Brown. Devontae Smith is already, so you got weapons on the outside, your offensive line, you got a run game. Tua, they bring in all the weapons for him, shore up the offensive line, and it's the recipe for how to have these young quarterbacks succeed. So good to see that happen, and maybe Chicago could take a little lesson from that one.
I think it's that, and I think it's Shane Steichen. It's like knowing who is the play caller best fits with that. And I think that's what you're seeing, too, is Mike McDaniel, who's going to be a play caller for Miami, he's playing to the strengths. Shane Steichen's doing that, too, in Philly. He's building an offense out around Jalen Hurts that you see the RPOs, you see the zone reads. It changes what defenses do. There's not a lot of play callers who are willing to adapt to the quarterback. We're seeing that become more and more prevalent, and you're seeing these quarterbacks have success.
How about another team that impressed me this weekend? Similar team. They go out and get Doug Peterson, Jacksonville Jaguars, to come in and help Trevor Lawrence. He's a former quarterback, had a lot of success with Carson Wentz in Philly. They come in there specifically for their franchise quarterback. They go make the move for Christian Kirk, sign him to this big deal. That was the team that impressed me the most this weekend. With Trevor Lawrence getting back-to-back wins for the first time in his career, he's looked impressive so far. I think Jacksonville, to me, was a team that really has impressed early this season. You see some of the numbers from last year to this year. And I do think, by the way, Doug Peterson inherited, it looked awful because of what Urban Meyer left behind. Well, he inherited a really good situation because expectations were low. Players were starving for a change of scenery. He's got a ton of young talent on that team. And now that he's developing it, I think Jacksonville's the team to beat in their division, too.
Looks like that right now, even though they're not the odds-on betting favorite. Let's not forget, too, Travis Etienne missed the entire season. He was another first-round pick the Jaguars never really got to see last year. And they spent more money in the offseason than we've ever seen in the history of the NFL. So clearly when Doug Peterson got there, he looked at the roster, looked at the personnel. It's like, if we're going to have any chance of winning, we're going to have to spend some cash. And obviously ownership there, the Khan family ponied up.
Let's go from the good to the bad, teams that impressed you to the teams that disappointed you the most. Danny, I want to start with you because you're going with the Raiders. I don't know if many of us saw them in this position at this point. 0-3, the only 0-3 team right now in the NFL.
This is one of the more surprising, shocking disappointments of the NFL season early. In fact, they're sitting here 0-3, and it has not been pretty. They bring in, kind of like we're talking about, they bring in Josh McDaniels to give Derek Carr the support, a system he needs. They go make the move for Devontae Adams, and they have had zero success, so much so. We were talking about this earlier. Mark Davis calls in Josh McDaniels and has a closed-door meeting. I mean, if anybody's hitting the panic button, it is clearly what is happening with the Raiders. And the most disappointing thing in this one is they've had winnable games. They've found ways to lose them, whether it was in Arizona. This one, they never really had a chance. They were down 24-10 at halftime, and it just never This team, I mean, there is talent on this roster. This was a winning team that made the playoffs last year, and they have regressed. That is a big cause for concern.
I think there's an interesting spot that Josh McDaniels took over this roster, because there was somewhere in between needing to kind of break it down and rebuild, or adding a few veteran pieces and seeing if you can make something of it. And that's what they chose to do. And right now, the Davante Adams, deal, it looks like, hey, on the outside, you're hooking up Derek Carr and Davante Adams. These two should have a lot of success together. Outside of week one, they really haven't. It hasn't had the impact, for example, that Tyreek Hill's had in Miami with Tua Tagovailoa. So it's hard looking forward, thinking that, Denver really hasn't played well so far this season. They're 2-1, right? They've still found a way. I think their best football is ahead of them. The Chargers, they seem like they're bitten by the injury bug. We'll see how they can come back from that once Herbert gets healthy, but I believe they just lost Rashawn Slater to a torn bicep tendon for the rest of the season, so they're having some issues. And the Chiefs, which is the team that I was most, I guess, kind of disappointed by, watching their performance versus the Colts. Look, the Colts were a winless football team, and they go on the road, they go play the Colts, and they just can't adapt to what defenses are doing against them. And it's not like Shaq Leonard's even playing. They don't even have their best player on the field for the Colts, but they don't run the football. You see all of these mistakes down the stretch. Patrick Mahomes and Eric Bieniemy are getting it, going to the locker room during halftime. You see penalties like Chris Jones down the stretch that helps keep alive that drive for Matt Ryan and the Colts to go ahead in the very end. It's just mistakes that you don't expect coming from some of the guys that they rely on the most. And we've seen it enough now where, Danny, teams keep trying to take away with a lot of that shell coverage and soft coverage. Run the football. You got one of the better offensive lines. You got a stable of running backs. And they don't want to. 23 rushing attempts to 37 this past week? It's almost a 2-to-1 pass to run. At some point, you have to develop that portion of your game. You can't put it all on Patrick Mahomes' shoulders.
Don't you think? I think this Chiefs run is very similar to the Golden State Warriors in the NBA. They have this incredibly talented team. They've got Patrick Mahomes, who's kind of changing the way the quarterback position is played, the way Steph Curry changed the game with a three-pointer. And very similarly, the Warriors throughout the last 4 or 5 years, sometimes they're not that motivated. They don't look like they're trying that hard, and they get a little bit arrogant. And in a 82-game schedule, it doesn't show up as much. But look at the Chiefs. I think this was a game they just sleptwalked through. And they've had a couple of these clunkers where they just kind of show up, they go through the motions, they get beat, and it's like a wake-up call. When they're at their best, they're still the team to beat. But they've got to learn from some of these mistakes and these kind of mistake-ridden games where they're not executing the way they're capable of doing.
They did it at the beginning of last season, too.
Yeah, exactly.
And it took them a while. They're like, oh, we should wake up and play football now.
Right. The difference is when we're looking at what's happening in the NFL right now, some of the bigger storylines, and what the Chiefs obviously did in the offseason is they don't have Tyreek Hill. And that's a guy where I don't care what coverage you were playing, that dude is fast enough where he breaks all the rules. Mm-hmm. And they don't have that guy right now. Even as fast as Mecole Hardman is, or Sky Moore, or Marquez Valdes-Scantling, they're not Tyreek Hill fast. They're not Cheetah fast. And that's one thing that I think it's obviously still a work in progress. I'm not giving up on the Chiefs. I still think they're going to win this division. But it does make a difference when, I don't care what kind of soft coverage you're trying to play, Tyreek Hill is going to eat that up, and he's going to find a way of making a play downfield. They don't have that guy right now. And I think that so far is playing a role in what the Chiefs don't have and what they're seeing from defenses. And we're seeing how it's paying off for the Miami Dolphins with Tyreek Hill and using that speed.
We're only 3 weeks in, but let me follow up with this really quickly because both of you mentioning your disappointing teams, AFC West teams, which is the division we hyped up by far the most out of any of them.
No, they still get 3 in the playoffs. They'll still.
Yeah,
I was never high on the Raiders to begin with. I thought last year they overachieved, and I thought they were going to have a rough time this year with this division. I think if you look at it this way, as bad as sometimes things have been, we're still at the beginning of the season. I'm not panicking at all. I think if anything, the best football's ahead. You're still going to see 3 get in the playoffs.
Chiefs and Chargers are fine. The Broncos, man, Nate Hackett's bringing in help from the outside.
Like maybe he should have hired him. Maybe he should have hired him
get-go, and maybe they would have avoided the Seattle loss. But that offense is sputtering. I keep trying to tell myself, hey, new coach, new quarterback, everybody's continuity's got to get there, and the defense is playing pretty well. Yeah. But, man, that offense is stuck in the mud.
Final drive, the go-ahead touchdown. That's the light at the end of the tunnel. That's the Russell Wilson. That's the offense that this can evolve into. They just need to do it more consistently.
So we got our quarterbacks here on set. We like to do a quarterback breakdown with each of you on Monday. Brady, let's start with you. You were on this call for the Vikings and the Lions there. What's your quarterback breakdown?
Yeah, give me a second to set this up. So the Vikings were really having a hard time really getting anything going on offense. I mean, they were running the football effectively, but the pass game, Jeff Okudah did a good job shutting down Justin Jefferson. Credit Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator for the Lions, and the scheme he came up with to take away Justin Jefferson. And so he made it hard on Cousins. Then you get to the end of the game, and they finally had a bigger play by KJ Osborne to set this up. But look what they're doing here. They're actually doubling Adam Thielen down low and Justin Jefferson up top. Cousins wisely sees the double team. Mike Hughes, in that case, the nickelback, he thinks he has help from the safety, but the safety's preoccupied with Thielen, who had stepped up earlier in this game, and he leaves KJ Osborne all alone, one-on-one for the touchdown. Cousins had missed some throws earlier in that game down the field. He didn't when it mattered the most. Came up clutch. That was the game-winning touchdown. Ended up being the game-winning touchdown for the Vikings. So credit to Kirk Cousins for bouncing back after all the talk last week after that bad Monday Night Football performance.
He always bounces back. That's my guy.
At 1 p.m. Eastern. At 1 p.m. Eastern.
Exactly. All right, for mine, I want to go to a third and ultra long in Miami in that Bills game, one of the bigger plays of the game, where Tua is out there, and this is somehow inexplicably complete. Look at the safety who's out of your screen, way to the right. He is out of the screen. He's playing deep, keep everything in front of me, but with a trips to the left, and you have this much speed on the field, watch where that safety, now this is Tua's eyes, holds that safety now to the left, and then you've got speed for days, beautiful wrap from Jalen Waddle, really pushed that corner out to the right side, really sold that corner on a little post corner in route, and this, Brady, to me, there's no defense for a perfectly thrown ball. I mean, that ball is absolutely on a dime from Tua. Held that left safety off with his left, staring to the left, and just perfect timing, perfect rhythm, speed right through the middle.
Where are all the Tua haters talking about how he doesn't have enough arm strength? That was perfectly in stride at Jalen Waddle, was it not?
Yeah, who can blaze, runs a 4.3.
I was just going to say, it seems like he's got plenty of arm strength there.
Yep, yeah.
I realized that really quickly, where do you put, if you had to put the Dolphins somewhat in your power rankings? I don't know who it was. One of our analysts said if they beat the Bills, and maybe it's not exactly the way they beat the Bills, but they did beat them, that they may be one of the best teams in the NFL right now.
It's not Pete Prisco, I can tell you that, by the way.
They're the third best team in the AFC. There's a lot of overreaction. If you look inside the numbers, it was in Miami. If they played them again in the playoffs, they're not going to have the advantage. But Buffalo doubled Miami up in almost every significant category. They ran 90 plays. No wonder they were dying out there. Controlled the time of possession 40-20. They had twice as many first downs. Buffalo probably should have won the game, but they didn't. So you got to give credit. And that's where I do think that win could be significant because maybe it does play at home field. And
I was just going to say, I mean, they just beat them head-to-head right now. They've got the edge in the division. There's a chance that you're talking about Buffalo hosting a home game. No, it could be Miami at this point. I mean, that's where things are leading. So, look, I think based on the precedent, we just watched these two teams play, you have to put Miami ahead of Buffalo. I'm sorry. I don't know if you're making the case to the best team in the AFC, but I do think they just beat what we thought was the best team in the AFC. So you got to give them a lot of credit there. I'm not out on the Chiefs. I still think they're right up there. The Bills are right behind the Dolphins. Those are kind of your top three the way they've played right now.
So let's roll on the Dolphins to Danny. We're talking about teams that have the most to prove in week 4 here, and it has to do with the Dolphins, but Bengals hosting the Dolphins this weekend.
Yeah,
this week, I should say.
Yeah, the Bengals coming off a much-needed, desperate backs against the wall win against the Jets.
Oh, there you go.
They've kind of,
the Jets will solve those illnesses.
That's the whole problem, though, is that it's still just the Jets that they beat. Now they've got to do it.
Robert Saleh, he might keep that receipt.
That's right. That's right. He's going to have a boatload of receipts that he's going to be trying to cash. But I still look at the Bengals as a team that set themselves behind the 8 ball, that has to do a better job protecting their franchise. And Joe Burrow, who, deletes all his social media accounts, that's always kind of a time to start panicking a little bit. But that is not a win that is going to, he's shut down his Twitter, his Instagram,
Danny's bothered by that.
What is this?
No, I'm just saying.
When did this trend become a thing?
Danny's bothered by that. Like most players do that when the season hits. If you really check it out.
But he never did, and now he did. So what does that mean?
This guy loves social
media. This is a big time stage for Cincinnati. It's a big, but Dolphins coming in, we were just talking about them as one of the best teams. Defending Super Bowl champ, there's been this Super Bowl hangover. It's not pretty, been through 3 weeks. They've got the most pressure on anybody because if they do win this game, they could flip the entire script, and we could talk about him being back and posting on Instagram.
Gosh. You're going to be like our social media little, if you need the deets on what's going down. Brady, what about you?
I've got the Las Vegas Raiders. You said it. I mean, 0-3 right now, staring that dead in the face. And who's their opponent this week? They got to play the Denver Broncos. That's
Divisional
where
opponent who
that's
has
where
been
Josh
playing great.
McDaniels used to be a
Yes.
coach. And here's the funny thing is, he's actually 0-6 as a head coach his last 6 games. That dates back to his time in 2010 as a Denver Broncos head coach. I recall that. I was there during that period of time. So I think there's a growing sense of, hey, he's a great offensive mind. Can he be a great head coach? I personally think he can be, but they got to start winning soon. And this is a Denver Broncos team that we saw how good they are defensively. We saw the rushing attack. It's if they can replicate what we saw in that game-winning drive against San Francisco on Sunday night, to be the team that I think Denver can be. For the Raiders, it's tough to put your finger on what the disconnect is. I mean, it doesn't seem like they can really put together a complete game in all 3 phases. So a lot of pressure right now, I think, on Josh McDaniels and maybe even Mark Davis as far as regretting this hire or wondering if this is the right hire.
We're wondering, our producer, know if we need like breaking news segments now for when a player deletes social media. We're just going to turn to you, Danny Kanell. Danny, Brady, thanks so much. Hang on just a second here, taking a look at games we got coming up on CBS this week. Bills at Ravens. You heard Brady say, the Dolphins are out of the Bills. Browns at Falcons, Jags at Eagles. That is a very intriguing matchup now. Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.